The concert hall was full of bright lights, expensive suits, and soft clapping. People had gathered from all over the city to watch one man perform. He was a famous pianist, known not just for his fast fingers, but also for his proud attitude. He walked onto the stage like a king, smiled like he already knew the crowd would love him, and sat at the piano as if it belonged only to him. The audience waited quietly as he lifted his hands. Then, with one strong move, he began to play. Music was fast, loud, and full of energy. His fingers moved like lightning over the keys. Some people gasped. Others clapped softly, trying not to interrupt. He finished with a dramatic twist, standing up as if he had just saved the world. After the performance, he stayed behind to talk to people. Reporters asked him questions, fans took photos, and he enjoyed every second. He loved being called a genius. He often said that music was something only the truly gifted could understand. One time during a private event, he even joked, "Ordinary people can't really feel true music. They just pretend they do." A few people laughed, but others looked uncomfortable. Sitting quietly at the back of the room was a woman dressed in simple clothes. She wasn't rich, and she didn't seem impressed. She just listened. When he looked her way, she smiled but didn't clap or say a word. That smile stayed with him. Longer than he expected. It wasn't a rude smile, but it didn't show respect either. It was quiet, calm, and sure like she knew something he didn't. Later that night, someone told him the woman worked at a small cafe near the theater. She cleaned tables and made tea. That made him laugh. She thinks she understands. "Music," he said, shaking his head. But something about her still bothered him. Why didn't she clap? Why did her smile feel like a challenge? The next day, he had some time before his evening show. Wanting to relax, he decided to visit that cafe. It was a quiet little place with old wooden chairs and soft music playing in the background. Behind the counter stood the same woman. Greeted him kindly, as if she didn't recognize him, but he could tell she did. In the corner of the cafe stood an old upright piano. Its surface was scratched, and some of the keys looked worn. He walked over and touched it. "Mind if I play?" he asked. She simply nodded. He sat down and played a short, loud piece. It was fast and flashy, filled with tricky moves. Few customers clapped. One even pulled out a phone to record. The woman behind the counter just kept wiping a cup, not even looking up. He stopped playing and looked straight at her. "No reaction?" he asked, half smiling. She looked up and said it was very fast. "Just fast?" he asked. She shrugged. Yes. There was a strange silence between them. Then he leaned back and said, "Why don't you try then?" She paused. The few people in the cafe turned their heads. A small smile crossed her face. "All right," she said gently, walking over to the piano. He moved aside, surprised that she even agreed. He crossed his arms, expecting to laugh a little or maybe hear a simple tune. But something in her calm steps, the way she sat down, and the silence that followed made everyone quiet. Even the coffee machine stopped hissing for a moment. No one knew it yet, but something unexpected was about to happen. The woman sat at the piano with quiet confidence. She didn't rush. She didn't look nervous. She gently placed her fingers on the keys and took a deep breath. The cafe had gone completely silent. The people waited, not sure what to expect. Even the proud pianist, now standing beside the piano with his arms crossed, watched closely. Waiting for something he could criticize, she pressed the first key. It was soft, too soft to hear at first. But then came the next note, and then the next. Slowly the melody began to grow. It wasn't fast or loud. It didn't show off. It was simple, but beautiful. It felt like something personal, like a quiet memory from childhood. The sound filled the room with warmth. People stopped sipping their coffee. A young couple held hands. An older man looked up from his newspaper and leaned in. Her fingers moved slowly with care. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was clear she was just playing from the heart. The pianist stood still, no longer smiling. He listened closely now. He knew every trick in the book, every style, every key, every pattern. But this was different. Her playing wasn't perfect in a technical way, yet it had something his didn't. something he couldn't explain. There was emotion in her notes. Real emotion. It wasn't just music, it was feeling. One of the waiters whispered, "She's amazing." Someone else said, "I didn't know she could play." No one had ever seen her like this before. To most people, she was just the kind, quiet worker who made their drinks and wiped their tables. But now, she looked like someone completely different. Not because she changed, but because they were finally seeing the part of her that had always been there. As she finished her piece, the last note hung in the air for a few seconds. Then silence, no one moved. And then, slowly, the cafe filled with soft, honest clapping. Not the kind of clapping you hear at big concerts where people just follow the crowd. This was the kind of applause that comes when something touches the heart. The pianist looked at her. For the first time in a long time, he didn't know what to say. She gave a small smile and quietly stood up from the piano. She didn't bow or wait for more praise. She simply returned to the counter, picked up a cloth, continued wiping down cups like nothing had happened. A young man near the window asked, "Where did you learn to play like that?" She replied softly from life. There were no music. Schools in her story, no grand stages, no awards. She had grown up in a small home with an old piano her grandfather gave her. She taught herself to play by listening, by feeling. When she was sad, she played. When she was happy, she played. And over the years, music became a part of who she was, not for others to see, but just for her own peace. Now, for the first time in many years, she had shared that part with someone else. The proud pianist stood in the corner, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: quiet. Not silence, but stillness. He realized something important that day. Music wasn't only about speed or big crowds or shining lights. It was about truth. And the simple woman behind the cafe counter had just shown him more truth in one soft song than he had ever found in all his performances. And deep inside, he knew he had challenged her. But he was the one who had been taught a lesson. The pianist couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. It was strange. He had played on the biggest stages in the world. Thousands had clapped for him. But in that small cafe, a woman with no fame, no fancy clothes, and no big name had touched the hearts of everyone with just a few simple notes. He felt something he didn't like to admit: confusion. The customers in the cafe slowly returned to their drinks and conversations. But the mood had changed. A kind of calm had spread through the room. The soft music still lived in their ears. The woman behind the counter didn't act proud or special. She didn't look for praise. She simply went back to her work like nothing had happened. The pianist, still standing near the old upright piano, finally spoke again. "That was different," he said, trying to sound casual. She looked at him and smiled lightly. Yes, I suppose it was. He wasn't used to being on the other side. Usually, people complimented him, asked for pictures, begged for lessons. But this woman didn't even try to impress him, and that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. "You didn't go to music school?" he asked, folding his arms. "No," she answered. "Couldn't afford it." "Then where did you learn to play like that?" "I listened. I felt. I made mistakes, and I kept playing." There was no pride in her voice, just honesty. A young man nearby whispered, "She beat him." His friend laughed softly. "He doesn't know what hit him." The pianist heard them, but pretended not to. He looked around and then said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Let's make it interesting. One more round. A real challenge." The cafe went silent again. People turned to look. Some were excited, others were unsure. But everyone knew something was about to happen. The woman raised her eyebrows slightly. "A challenge." "Yes," he said, now with more energy. "We each play one more piece. Something that shows our best. Then, let the people decide." She paused, thinking. She didn't want to turn it into a battle. Music for her was not about winning or losing. But she could see the crowd was waiting, and the moment felt important, not just for him, but maybe even for her too. "All right," she said quietly. "But I don't play to win," he smiled. "That makes it easier for me." She didn't respond. sat down at the piano first. He cracked his fingers and gave a proud look to the crowd. Then he began to play. It was loud, fast, and full of skill. His hands moved quickly, jumping over keys like fire. The room filled with sound. People were impressed. He was truly talented. Some nodded, some clapped softly during the piece. When he finished, he stood and took a deep breath, wiping a bit of sweat from his forehead. He looked at her, almost as if to say, "Now try to beat that." She walked over to the piano without a word. She didn't fix her hair or adjust her shirt. She didn't stretch her fingers. She just sat down quietly and placed her hands on the keys. The cafe grew silent again. Even the children in the corner stopped moving. She began to play. This time, the melody was deeper, not sad but emotional, like a song written for someone who left long ago. It was personal, soft, and full of little details that made hearts ache in a good way. No one moved. Even the proud pianist stood still. Listening more than watching, the final note faded slowly into silence. And in that silence, the room seemed to breathe. The people didn't cheer. They didn't clap right away. They just sat quietly, moved by something they didn't expect to feel on an ordinary day, and the proud pianist, for the first time, felt unsure of what to say or do. The woman slowly lifted her hands from the piano keys. Her last note still hung in the air, like a whisper that didn't want to leave. The room stayed quiet. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the entire cafe had frozen in time. Then, one by one, people started to breathe again. A soft clap came from the back of the room, then another. Soon the whole cafe filled with gentle applause, not wild, but deep and honest. The kind of applause that comes straight from the heart. The woman stood up and gave a small, polite nod. She didn't smile to show pride. She didn't look around to soak in praise. She simply walked back to the counter, picked up a napkin, and began cleaning the coffee machine, like it was just another day. But for everyone in that room, it wasn't just another day. The pianist stood beside the piano, looking a bit lost. He had played his most difficult piece, full of speed, perfect timing, and dramatic notes. Yet it felt empty compared to what she had played. He knew it, and he could see the others felt it too. One man said softly, "Her music made me think of my mother." A woman nearby added, "It felt like she was telling a story without words." The pianist looked around and tried to smile, but it didn't come naturally. He wasn't used to losing, especially not like this. He had always believed that music was about skill, practice, and control. And yet her quiet, simple playing had moved people in a way he never could. He sat back down at the piano, almost without thinking. He touched the keys, but didn't press them, just stared, as if he was trying to understand what had just happened. The woman noticed, but didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Music had already spoken for her. After a moment, he stood up again and walked toward her. The cafe went quiet once more. People watched closely, wondering what he would say. He stopped at the counter and looked at her. She looked up, calm as ever. "Where did that come from?" he asked. She wiped her hands with a towel and said, "I wrote that piece a long time ago. It was for someone I lost." He nodded slowly, not asking for details. Didn't need to. No. He had felt the pain and the beauty in every note. It had said more than words ever could. He paused and then said, "It was incredible." "Thank you," she replied kindly. He took a deep breath. "I don't think I've ever played like that, not really." She tilted her head slightly. "Maybe you've been too busy playing for others, instead of for yourself." Those words hit him harder than any insult ever could. But they weren't meant to hurt. She said them gently, with no judgment. And that made it even more powerful. He looked around the cafe. The people weren't fans. They were just normal people moved by real feeling. Maybe for the first time, he understood that music wasn't about perfection. It was about connection. He stepped back, then gave a small bow, not to show off, but to show respect. "I challenged you," he said, "but you reminded me why I started playing in the first place." She nodded. Music is more than notes. It's something we carry inside. The pianist looked down, thinking. Then, without another word, he walked out of the cafe. Not angry, not ashamed, just quiet. Something inside him had changed, and everyone in the cafe, including the woman behind the counter, felt it. The next few days were quiet at the cafe. People still came for their usual coffee and tea, but the mood had changed. Some came back just to ask about the woman who played the piano. A few even asked her to play again. She smiled kindly and said, maybe another time. She didn't want attention. She wasn't trying to become famous. For her, that moment had already passed, and she had shared what was inside her. But the pianist, he couldn't forget it. He stayed away for a while, didn't go back to the cafe, didn't play concerts or attend fancy events. He stayed in his apartment, sitting at his grand piano in silence. His fingers hovered above the keys, but something inside him had shifted. Could play the same pieces as before, but they didn't feel the same. It was like something was missing, something he had never noticed before. He kept remembering the way her music felt. It wasn't just about the song. It was the way it touched people, the way it made the room still. He had tried all his life to master piano through skill, through speed, through perfect timing. But her song came from something else, something deeper. One evening, he finally sat down and tried to play not for a crowd. Not for attention, but just for himself. He played slowly. No fast tricks, no showy moves, just soft notes. He played what he felt, not what he had memorized. And for the first time in a long time, the music felt real. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. That night, he made a decision. The next morning, he returned to the cafe. He walked in quietly. The woman was wiping down a table near the window. She looked up, saw him, and gave a small nod. He walked over to the counter. "Do you have a moment?" he asked as she set the cloth down and faced him, of course. "I want to thank you again," he said. "You gave me something I didn't even know I needed." She said nothing, just listened. He continued, "I've played piano for more than 20 years. I've learned every style, every trick. But after hearing you play, I realized I never really understood what music could be." She looked at him with gentle eyes. "Sometimes we get too busy chasing the stage. We forget why we started." He nodded slowly. "That's exactly what happened to me." There was a pause, then he asked, "Would you teach me?" She looked surprised. "Teach you?" "Yes, not technique, not speed, just how to feel again, how to play from the heart." For a moment, she didn't answer. But then she smiled. "You already know how. You just have to stop trying so hard." He let out a soft laugh. "That might be the hardest part." They sat down at the small table near the piano. She didn't treat him like a famous artist. She didn't treat him like someone better or worse. It's just a person. And in that quiet space, they talked not about fame, not about concerts, but about music, life, what it means to be truly heard. From that day on, he began visiting the cafe more often. Sometimes they played. Sometimes they just talked. No cameras, no pressure. Just two people connected by music, and slowly, the proud pianist started to change. Not just how he played, but how he saw the world. He wasn't trying to win anymore. He was learning to listen. The cafe slowly became a place of quiet change. People still came for their drinks and pastries, but there was something new in the air. The proud pianist who once believed he knew everything about music now came in almost every other day. Not as a star, not as a performer, just as a man trying to find something real. He usually came in the morning when the cafe was less busy. He and the woman would sit near the old upright piano, sometimes in silence, sometimes with soft talk, about music, memories, or nothing special at all. He didn't try to impress anymore. He didn't rush to play difficult songs. He listened more. He paid attention to how she moved her fingers, how she paused at certain notes, and how her music always told a story even without words. At first, some customers were confused. They knew him as a famous pianist, always full of pride. But now, he sat in the corner, looking calm, even humble. He didn't ask for special treatment, even helped once when a little girl dropped her cup. He picked it up, cleaned the mess, and smiled. No one expected that. One day a boy who loved piano came into the cafe with his mother. He noticed the man sitting near the piano and whispered, "Is that really him?" His mother nodded. "Think so." The boy walked up shyly and asked, "Can you play something?" The man looked at the boy and smiled. "Only if your mom lets you sit beside me." The boy sat next to him, and together they played a simple song, slow, a little messy, but full of joy. People watched and smiled. Some took videos, but not for fame, just to capture a sweet, human moment. The woman stood behind the counter, watching. She didn't interrupt. She didn't take credit, but she knew something beautiful was happening. Later, as the cafe started to empty, the man turned to her and said, "I think I understand now." "Understand what?" she asked. "Why your music feels different? It's not just about the notes. It's about letting go. I always thought I had to control every sound, make everything perfect. What you let it breathe." She smiled. "Music isn't something we hold too tightly. It's something we share." Looked down at his hands. "I used to believe only the best players could touch hearts. Now I know. The heart comes first, not the hands." She nodded. "It took me years to learn that." There was a quiet pause between them, not uncomfortable, just peaceful. He finally asked, "Have you ever thought of playing on stage again?" She looked at the piano and then at him. "I used to dream of it. But now, I don't need a big stage. This little cafe is enough." He respected that answer. Fame wasn't her goal. Maybe deep down, he started to feel the same way. He stayed a little longer that day, helping clean tables, talking to the regulars, even laughing with the staff. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that cafe full of pride. The people saw it. The woman saw it. And most importantly, he felt it. This wasn't just about learning music again. It was about learning how to be human again. And somehow, in this quiet place, guided by a woman who never chased praise, he had found the part of himself that he had forgotten. A few weeks passed. The cafe had become a peaceful place where something special had taken root. The woman still worked behind the counter, quietly doing her daily tasks. And the man, the once proud pianist, kept coming back. He didn't come as a performer anymore. He came as a student, not of music, but of feeling, of listening, of life. People noticed the change in him. He smiled more now. He laughed, spoke kindly to strangers. The man who once stood under bright lights and played for applause now played for silence, for stillness, for connection. One evening, just as the cafe was about to close, a small group of musicians entered. They were young, carrying their instruments. With excitement, one of them approached the woman and said, "We heard this is the cafe where the music touched hearts." She smiled. "That depends on who's playing." They laughed and asked if they could play a few songs. She nodded. Chairs were moved, the lights were softened, and soon the quiet cafe turned into a small, cozy music night. People gathered. Some were regulars. Others had heard whispers of what had happened weeks ago. The man sat quietly at a corner table, listening. He wasn't the center of attention anymore, and that didn't bother him. He was content just being there, hearing others play with passion and truth. After a while, one of the musicians recognized him and walked over. "You're the pianist, right?" He nodded. "Will you play something?" The cafe went quiet again. All eyes turned to him. He stood up slowly and looked at the woman behind the counter. She didn't say a word, just gave him a soft nod of encouragement. He walked to the piano. The same old upright one with the worn keys and faded wood. He sat down, touched the keys gently, and took a deep breath. This time he didn't prepare something grand or dramatic. He didn't plan to show off. Instead, he let his fingers move slowly, carefully, as if he were speaking through the keys. The melody was soft. It was full of emotion, but not heavy. It carried joy, sadness, memories, and something else, peace. As he played, the room fell silent. Some people closed their eyes, others held hands. One man wiped a tear from his cheek. When the last note faded, no one clapped right away. It was like everyone needed a moment just to sit with what they had felt. Then the softest applause began. Not wild, not loud. Just enough to say thank you. He stood up and gave a small bound, the kind for big stages, but the kind that comes from a humble place. He walked back to his seat. The woman looked at him and said quietly, "You finally played for real." He nodded. "Thanks to you." That night, no one cared who was famous or unknown. They only cared about the music, the kind that speaks to the heart. After the cafe closed, the man stayed behind to help clean. He just wanted to, as they wiped down tables together, he looked at the piano one last time and said, "I used to think I needed big crowds to feel alive. But here, in this little cafe, I felt more than I ever did in a concert hall." She looked at him and replied, "Because here you weren't trying to be someone. You were just being yourself." He smiled. Not the proud smile he used to wear, but a real one. The kind that comes when someone finally finds what they didn't even know they were searching for. And with that, the once elitist pianist walked out into the night, not as someone who lost a challenge, but as someone who had been changed by it forever.